Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone, to this Asian Intelligent episode. So we're exploring everything Asian in Web3. We're exploring kind of like trends and things that are happening in the space. My name is Francesco. I'm contributing to ModernDAO, and I'm leading developer relation at MetaMask Consensus. And it's an honor today to have Haseeb from Dragonfly. I don't know if you really need introduction here, but for the audience out there that doesn't know you, you want to quickly introduce yourself, Azib?
Yes, thanks for having me, Francesco. I'm Haseeb. I'm managing partner at Dragonfly. We're a long-time crypto investment firm. We back everything in the space. Actually, investors into Consensus from back in the day. We invest in everything in the space. Most of what I focus on is kind of core technology. So, layer ones, layer twos, infrastructure, ZK, and then of course on the AI side, I spend a lot of my time looking at AI deals and AI founders, which is part of the reason why I have written a lot in recent years about what's happening in AI, both on the crypto side and also on the pure play AI side. So happy to be here and glad to chat about what's going on at the intersection of crypto and AI.
Look, it's really a pleasure to have you here. I think like you're seeing the big picture. You're kind of like a thought leader in the space. I think not just for builders, but also like for users and even people in Web2. They want to see, okay, what's going on in the space. But let's dive into a little bit like, so what are kind of like the things that you're seeing around like AI agents today? Are you happy with all this kind of like development? Is this kind of like the nature of innovation that you were thinking about like 8 months ago, where people were starting to speak about those agentic kind of like things, or what do you think about it?
Yeah, so the honest answer is that it's still very early.
Yes.
It's going to take a lot of time for this technology to get fully baked and to actually be able to deliver the promises that most people have been given about what this technology is going to do. If you look at the agentic technology that's there today, most of what it can do is basically take a query and translate it into some kind of swap transaction. So, I want to trade this meme coin for that meme coin, or maybe there's a very confined or constrained state space of deposit something into Aave or borrow something over here. That these programs can do with some error rate that's like probably greater than 5%. Less than 10%, something like that. That's roughly what you're getting today, looking at some of the applications that are live. Now, this is not where things are going to be in a few years, right? What you can see is that, and to be clear, this is not just a crypto thing. This is across the board with respect to agents today, is that agents are not really fully working yet, but they're starting to work. So, let's say that you want to order a pizza, a very simple task that, you could probably get a 12-year-old to order you a pizza online. Today, if you get one of these agents, whether it's OpenAI's agent with Operator or Claude with their computer use, and you try to get it to order you a pizza, it's going to succeed like probably 85-90% of the time, which is really good because it used to be like 5% of the time it could order you a pizza. Yes. But if you had a personal assistant that failed to order you a pizza 10% of the time, you would just be like, okay, you're fired. Also, I'll just order my own pizzas. Like, it's fine. I'm not even going to bother having to deal with the failure case of ordering a pizza. So that kind of efficacy, I think what you should expect to see is that these things will be toys. Yes. For it's sort of like even as the rate of efficacy keeps improving and improving, they will remain toys. They will not be used in production until you cross a critical threshold. And once the critical threshold is crossed, which to be clear is less about crypto than it is about AI, once these AI agents get good enough that they have this sort of criticality threshold, then all of a sudden people are going to be using them everywhere. And it's sort of like, the way I describe it, it's like nothing, and then suddenly everything. Where you will start delegating more and more of your financial life and more of your financial decisions into these agentic AIs. And so a lot of what these startups are building, if you look at things like, Prompt, obviously, which is the token behind Wayfinder, there's a bunch more of these that are trying to build these agentic stacks that integrate directly into your wallet. Most of what you're going to see is very little usage until all of a sudden it flips and suddenly there's a cohort of people who are doing everything using these AIs. I think it's likely to take years. It's not going to be months until we see that kind of improvement. It's sort of like, okay, first and foremost, ordering pizzas. Then you're going to get, more general computer use that are relevant to things like personal assistant type tasks, like booking you flights, getting you your concert tickets, this kind of stuff. That's relatively low stake. Doing your shopping on Amazon, this kind of stuff that's relatively straightforward. And the very last stage that you're going to see for these agentic AIs is making complicated financial transactions in an adversarial environment like the blockchain, right?
Yeah.
This is where if something goes wrong, it can go really wrong. Whereas if it's like, okay, order me, some diapers on Amazon, you can't mess up that badly ordering diapers on Amazon.
Yeah.
You also can't mess up that badly ordering a pizza, but you can mess up really, really badly, doing a swap with the wrong meme coin.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah. Think about rebalancing stuff. And they're like
Exactly. Or like borrowing with it, with getting liquidated when you're borrowing from some on-chain lending protocol. This kind of stuff is very sensitive because if it goes wrong, you can lose a lot of money. Yes. Which is why it's going to take longer for this technology to get robust enough and to become adversarially robust. So it's not just in the happy case things go well, it's that in the world where there are a lot of AI agents that are on-chain, you're going to get a lot of AI agent honeypots. Yeah. Right? You're going to get people deploying contracts and deploying fake coins that are designed purely to trick AI agents into buying them. That maybe even something that a human being would never fall for, right? So look at jailbreaks. You'll never get a human being to basically give you the recipe for how to cook meth, but you can get AI agents to do it if you say the right magic words, right? Yes. There are no magic words that you convince some random chemist to give you an essay on how to cook meth. So this kind of thing where AI agents have failure modes that human beings do not have is likely to continue for some time, and it's going to be the reason why it's going to take longer for these AI agents to get good enough to be doing these on-chain tasks, but they will. Oh, yeah. So it might be a matter of 2, 3, 4 years before they're at that level of robustness. But once it happens, I think it's going to be transformative with respect to the way in which, as human beings, we interact with the crypto tools that we all use.
Yeah. Look, I was speaking both in Denver and Dubai. Was like everybody, half of the AI agent panels. I think like one of the biggest keywords being used is hallucination, right? Like so many models actually like going on false positive. There is so many things, right? And I wonder even like on your take on, maybe those agents kind of like the first wave of kind of like adoption would be actually be based on protocols. It's not even kind of like a B2C specific, would be actually like a agent to protocol specific services for rebalancing, DeFi specific protocol to actually add value to their yields. Do you feel that maybe this is kind of like an easier kind of like adoption rate, that protocols and kind of services that are actually like build front ends for their users are adopting this first?
So are you imagining on the governance side, or are you imagining in terms of like protocol developers using AI?
I think even on basically like DeFi agent use case, I see already like rebalancing agents, yield optimizer agents. I'm feeling it right now that if we don't have a pure standardization and attestation of those mechanisms, we will fall again like a DeFi summer fork of the fork of the fork of those dexes, and you get actually like users being kind of like victims at the end. And I'm asking myself, maybe those agents can be used first by basically the protocol engineers actually like as kind of like intermediary services for enhancing their value offering to the end users.
Yeah, so that is certainly true. That being said, I think it's also worth taking a step back and defining what we mean when we say agent. Yes. Agent is one of these words like AI that's gotten overloaded, and now people mean different things when they say agent. What most people think they mean when they say agent is some kind of active participant that's taking actions, right? So if you're just a chatbot like a ChatGPT, you're not an agent. You're just responding to user queries. You're not taking actions autonomously, right? And anytime you take an action, you're affirmatively getting the permission of the user before you take that action. Yeah. Something that's agentic is autonomously taking actions in the world. They're producing side effects. They're impacting things outside of just the chat box. And the other thing about that agent is that we assume when we're talking about these agents is that they're backed by large language models. If they are not backed by large language models, well, actually, we have a word for that. We used to call those bots, right? Bots have existed in crypto basically forever, right? If you think about where's all the MEV happening, where's all the arbitrage going between different exchanges happening, those are all happening from bots. These are autonomous, software-driven, quote-unquote agents that are already doing all this stuff. So if you look, for example, at yield optimizers. Yes. Yield optimizers have been around forever, right? Like literally, there were a ton of these back in 2020 and DeFi summer. These were all purely autonomous in the sense that there was all software that was defining how these things were moving. There were no LLMs involved. I mean, LLMs at that time were, of course, very, very crappy compared to where they are today. But you don't really need LLMs to do yield optimization. In fact, yield optimization is such a well-defined and such a sort of convex problem that you actually have very well-defined classical algorithms you can use in order to do yield optimization, right? It's actually a very simple mathematical problem. So yield optimization is one of these things where people might call them, oh, this is happening with agents, but really it's bots, right? I mean, the term that we've used historically for this is bots. You don't need to solve any of these hard problems that we've just been elaborating on, of like hallucinations and whatnot, in order to do yield optimizers or in order to do auto rebalancing type stuff. Hedge funds have been doing this for years, and even a lot of these protocols have been doing this for years. So that I want to put in a separate bucket because these are purely mathematically defined problems for which an LLM, right? The whole idea of an LLM is that it's good at language. If you don't need language to solve this problem, then you should be using an LLM. It's these very free-form, open-ended problems that require, looking at smart contract code, understanding, kind of more less structured trade-offs between different decisions that requires general reasoning. If you need general reasoning to solve this problem, looks like you
no, it's not me. No,
okay, no, you're good. Then that's the kind of place where you would need a large language model. So I think for a lot of these use cases, and you're seeing people again using this marketing term of, oh, we have agents to solve this problem, to solve that problem. You don't need LLMs. These problems were solved years ago, really. The only thing that you might need in Agent 4 is if you think about a yield optimizer, right? What a yield optimizer is doing is looking at, let's say, 20 sources of yield, and it's probably using some kind of greedy algorithm to basically bin pack all of the different sources of yield to find the maximum net yield that you can get for a given thing. And you can maybe imagine there's some risk parameter and say, okay, this is this amount of risk or this amount of historical volatility. And so there's all sorts of ways you can do this, but it's all mathematical, right? It's all something that you can just define in Python code. You don't need a large language model to help you with this. But if, for example, I mean, the reason why this might be tough to generalize is that what are all the sources of yield that you're putting into the algorithm? And that answer usually, historically, has been whitelisted by a human being, right? Some human being is looking at all the protocols and saying, well, this one looks scammy, this one looks real, this one looks trustworthy enough, and we're going to put this into the big system and let it spit out, what we should do. One can imagine a world where you use LLMs to investigate all of the different candidates that could become the next yield or the next source of yield, and decide, okay, well, look, this one looks scammy. I'm looking at the team. I'm like investigating their LinkedIn's. I'm using some sort of deep research like construct in order to see which of these things are actually trustworthy enough to go into the repository of potential yield sources. That is how you create an end-to-end protocol that could be a yield optimizer, fully no humans in the loop. But to be honest, is that a real problem? Is that something that the market is crying out for? The reality is that there aren't that many great sources of yield these days, right? We've seen a lot of consolidation in the market where things like Aave and Morpho and Compound they're kind of the big ones, and MakerDAO, and there's not that many new ones coming about any given day. It's not DeFi summer anymore. So as a result, I don't think this is really a problem that needs LLMs, but it's one of these things that it sounds cool. When people throw it out there, they're like, oh, this is completely LLM intermediated and there's no humans in the loop.
Yeah, I agree. I think I see mostly like kind of like the source of data, I was imagining and debating stuff around, okay, what happened really this cycle? Okay, we had all the kind of like meme coin kind of cycle, but one thing I was really proud of was seeing kind of like Web2 kind of like PhD or kind of top mind in terms of kind of this smart kind of like brain injection in this cycle specifically was because top Web2 developers and builder were seeing actually the value that blockchain bring around kind of like 360 kind of like data on chain, having kind of like a verifiable credential. I feel kind of like proud to say, okay, there is much more than to look around kind of like meme coin specific. And one thing I want to state is that, I like actually like doing quick research. And I remember, like you mentioned, around exactly what you said right now, AI agent in crypto are not truly agentic, but are sophisticated chatbots like linked to cryptocurrency or meme coin, primarily designed for interaction rather than autonomous operation. And I really like what you're saying here because we are missing parts. And I want to ask you, like, what are those parts that we're actually like missing in terms of like, to actually build the full kind of like 360, or maybe we are too early. We don't even have standardization of framework. Like if I'm thinking about kind of like NFT attributes, when there is ERC20 where even kind of like forms. Right now there is no standardization around agent-to-agent collaboration. Is it too early to speak about agent-to-agent collaboration, or you think like we should start speaking about it?
I mean, look, it's very clearly early. That being said, there are different protocols that are being developed right now. So you see MCP, obviously, which is not necessarily agent to agent, but it's agent to tools. You see the same thing now happening with there's Project Nanda, which has come out of MIT. There's A2A. There's I think, which is what is that, like? I think it's IBM or something that's working on A2A, as well as Google. And there's a few protocols that are now being developed and kind of tossed around that may become the standard for agent-to-agent communication. At the end of the day, if agents are sufficiently intelligent, then of course the answer is that they don't need one particular algorithm. They can find whatever language the other agent is speaking and figure it out on the fly, if they are in fact generally intelligent and fully capable. So I think in a way, this is one of those problems that solves itself and doesn't necessarily need standardization, but standardization helps in just creating a lingua franca that makes it easy for everybody to just get started and to communicate more efficiently. So I think with agents, is it too early? Kind of not, right? Like there are fully agentic systems that are already working, but they're generally not. They're not in very open-ended categories like crypto, for example. So I was just talking to a company relatively recently that's doing basically has a multi-agent system that does medical billing. Right, so they have one agent that basically acts as a doctor, another agent that acts as a medical coder, because medical billing is like a whole nightmare thing, and they have a multi-agent system, and they use A to A in order to communicate across these agents, and it works. And it doesn't have to be A to A, no, it could be anything, but it has to be something. Otherwise, the agents are just going to be speaking a natural language, which is less efficient. So it's at the end of the day an efficiency game. And that efficiency is increased by everyone speaking the same language. In the same way, look, you and I could be doing this interview in different languages, and we could have AI agents translating for us in real time, and that would work, but it's less efficient. It's just going to be slower and more clunky, and it's like, why would we pay that sort of bandwidth cost of not communicating in the same language? That's the way that agents are going to interact with each other. But today, you have to have a very constrained domain. Something like medical billing is a great example of that. In order to have agents be able to actually solve these problems. So if it's what we've seen across AI generally is what people call now the jagged capabilities frontier, meaning that the ability for agents to be able to do certain things is very uneven. They can do certain things really, really well. Like they can do academic math problems. They can do coding. They can do these very constrained things. But if you want them to book a flight, they kind of fall over, right? This, where they're superhuman on certain things and subhuman on other things, that is going to continue for quite a while, and probably for a very long time, which is part of the reason why it's unintuitive unless you play around with these models and actually try them out to figure out what can they do and what can't they do. And this is, I think, one of the things I'd recommend to anybody who's trying to pay attention to this field. The best way to learn is not to listen to thought leaders, but to just use these models a lot and try them on different things. Exactly. Build things, try them out, like actually run experiments yourself and build your own intuition for what can it do and what can't it do.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think people hearing here, like, and a bunch of builders are always like hearing here, like people already testing out different frameworks. I think like people are also looking for agility in terms of like frameworks. They don't want to be locked in, accounting the fact that, there are a bunch of like Web2 developer coming to the space. They want to actually like, build kind of like, I don't know, Lagrange or like Python specific kind of like agents. One of the things I want to ask you is, so for what I'm understanding here is that you believe more in verticalized agents versus kind of like more generalized agent, or depends on the use case?
I think it really depends on how these models evolve. I think, it depends on how these models evolve. If you see models that just become incredibly superhuman, overcome a lot of the issues with hallucinations, start generalizing way, way better, then maybe it's going to be general agents, and you're just going to want to use the superhuman OpenAI agent or the superhuman Google agent. And that's going to be the backend to all of the subdomains in which people try to get this stuff to work. My guess is that that's not where we're going, and that what you're going to see is that these agents that you see, like for example, with Gemini or with Claude or whatever, these are mostly now being built through reinforcement learning pipelines. And these reinforcement learning pipelines are specific to certain domains in which they're doing the reinforcement learning, right? So which mostly means math and code. So if you want to solve a problem in math and code, these agents are fantastic. If you're out of domain, then these agents just reliably fall over and cannot perform even basic tasks, right? So my guess is, and I haven't seen anybody do this yet, but I'd be really curious to see somebody who does this, is my guess is what we have to see to get a really, really good crypto agent is to get some kind of reinforcement learning chassis up and running within a blockchain environment, such that you can imagine creating some kind of it's often called a gym or like a simulation environment where you have an agent inside of a blockchain, like on Ethereum or on the SVM, and you're telling that agent go rebalance this thing. And if you succeed, you can programmatically check it in this kind of simulated environment and give the model a reinforcement reward signal of like -1 or 1, depending on whether or not it completes the task. And you just do this millions of times with lots and lots of different tasks. And some of these tasks involve honeypots, getting scammed, getting hacked, like the real failure cases that you would want to see from an agent doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing in a blockchain environment. That would be like, that's, to be clear, that's how you train these things on code. It's how you train these things on math. It's why these things have become superhuman in these domains, is because of these reinforcement learning environments that people have built. Nobody's built that yet for a blockchain. If somebody builds it for a blockchain, my guess is that's the fastest path to actually getting a blockchain capable agent. But that might take a while. It's going to take a lot of capex to build something of that scale.
No, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, battle testing agents, having frameworks similar to what I'm thinking about, stuff like Hardhat for smart contracts. Battle testing, kind of like a agent. It might be interesting. And actually, right now, I want to hear your pick on kind of like quantum computes and stuff, because people. But that's I think like let's leave it at that. But see, I think like hearing from you a little bit, like we are hearing here. A DeFi agent, obviously there is social agents with stuff like AICCZ and much other opportunities vertical out there. Do you think, because you probably see like bunch of like kind of like those use cases around IC and stuff, and I'm just wondering like are some verticals that we are underestimate right now, and this could be around agents, but also could be like other specific opportunities.
Honestly, that's hard to say that there are sectors of crypto AI that are underexplored right now. I see a lot of startup pitches and a lot of people exploring a lot of things. The reality is that it's really hard to build for a customer who doesn't exist yet. There's a lot of people trying to build stuff for AIs or trying to build stuff for agents. And if agents aren't really working yet, then it's a little bit like saying like, it's like trying to build DeFi in 2016. You couldn't really build DeFi in 2016 because there was no money on chain. There was no stablecoins. There were no degens on chain. The people who just owned ETH and weren't really doing anything with smart contracts beyond gambling effectively. So there's a lot of things like this that the order of operations really matters. And if you don't actually have customers in front of you, so for example, I've seen at this point, I don't know, kajillion pitches for AI agent layer 1, right? This is kind of one of those ideas that just keeps getting recycled and pitched over and over. And the problem with building an AI agent L1 is that the AI agents don't exist yet. So how do you know what they want? How do you know how to build an L1 in the right way? How do you know they even need their own L1? This kind of thing where you're projecting what your customer is and what they want and guessing what they're going to need before they arrive, that is a very, very dangerous game to play, because startups at the end of the day, they need feedback. They need, just like the AI agent I was talking about in this reinforcement learning environment, startups need a reward signal. They need a reward signal to back propagate against and to kind of guide themselves in the direction of building the right thing. If you don't know what that reward signal is and you're imagining the reward signal, here's what I think an AI agent that's using a blockchain would want when you've never seen an AI agent use a blockchain in your life. Then you're just going to kind of be guessing and kind of wandering off into the desert, hoping to find something that works, right? And if you remember, early on in the ICO boom, there were a lot of projects that were like, okay, we're going to build for IoT devices. We're going to build the best chain for IoT devices, and there were no IoT devices that were actually using the blockchain. And if you don't have any actual customers and everything is just kind of imagined of what they would want, guarantee you're going to build the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And you're going to be
Great.
optimizing what you're building for clicks and for press releases and for optics, as opposed to optimizing for customers. And that is a trap out of which you can basically never recover.
I mean, it's also like a big bias of founders in general, right? Because, you know, you always expect things that this is the way that should go without actually knowing sometimes your audience, because you never actually research what your audience wants, right?
Exactly.
I mean, there's also like a lot of kind of like UX and, you know, account abstraction kind of like things that are happening right now post Spectra, right? Like we need to actually like build in order to create a better like on-chain economy, assuming kind of like people want to get on chain. That's also like, you know, bunch of assumption that we are almost kind of like founder of our own space, assuming that pain points of like, you know, users coming into space are having right now. But I like what you're saying on specific things, and I also wonder like what do you think are other common mistake that builders, founders, companies should avoid? Because this is not on the agency side. It's also like based on could be from ICO, could be like back in the days. Like, so you've been funding companies for a long time. You've been seeing a lot of those innovation. Like, what do you think are kind of like the biggest mistake that people should avoid?
I mean, there's too many to name, so it's hard to narrow down to like one or two mistakes. The most important thing is to have fast iteration loops. This is the thing that I think most people don't sufficiently appreciate about startups, is that the reason why startups are so powerful, the reason why they are potentially successful at the things that they're good at, because startups don't have capital, they don't have distribution, they don't have the best talent in the world because the best talent is already accounted for, or they can't afford the best talent, right? So what do they have? The answer is that what startups have is two things. One, they have a higher rate of learning. They can learn faster and ship faster than a big company can because they have no other constraints. And the smaller you are and the less committed you are to any individual thing, the faster you can learn, which means everything you can do to increase your learning rate, you should be doing. The more feedback you get, the more often you talk to your customers, the more often you're actually iterating the product and using it yourself, that is going to increase your speed of learning. Whereas if you're at a big company, then all that stuff just happens more slowly. There's just more people in the loop on every single decision, which means the fewer decisions per hour, the fewer decisions per day, the lower your learning rate is ultimately going to be, and the slower you're going to move and adapt to a new technology, which is often why technology shifts is when you see startups actually get the ability to outmaneuver the incumbents, right?
Yes.
OpenAI was behind on AI for a long time compared to Google, but they were able to break way ahead with ChatGPT and launch this product out in the open when Google behind the scenes already had LLMs working at the same scale as OpenAI did, but they just never released them because as a big company, they were just too slow. They weren't learning at the same pace that OpenAI was learning, right? And then Google eventually had to play catch up, and they're still behind in terms of the adoption of Gemini compared to OpenAI. So this is a universal phenomenon, is that big companies are slower to learn than small companies and startups. That's the first unfair advantage of a startup, is that they can learn faster. But then you have to make sure you're actually getting that advantage. You have to make sure you're actually learning as fast as you possibly can. And then the second thing is that startups have courage. And that sounds very simplistic, but it's really deep, which is that startups can take all sorts of risk. They can move really, really fast. They can throw away products that are not working and start over and pivot entirely, right? Big companies do not have courage. They cannot disrupt themselves. They're too terrified to burn the boats. They're too terrified to disrupt the mothership. They're too terrified to bet everything and go all in on a certain idea. As a startup, you can do that. And again, if you never do that, then you're letting go of one of your most foundational advantages as a startup, is the fact that you have much less to lose. And because you have much less to lose, you can actually go all in on something that a big company will never be able to follow you on. So that's why, as a startup, you should be pushing yourself toward the precipice, right? You should be always at the vanguard. So that's why I don't begrudge any startup that's saying, look, we're going to do a bunch of crazy shit with AI agents. Great, go do crazy shit with AI agents. A big company would never dare to do that because it's too risky. What if it doesn't work? What if there's this? What if there's that? What if it takes too long? As a startup, it's like, okay, well, if it takes too long, I'm going to die, but I'm going to die anyway. You know, my base case is that I'm going to die. So I might as well go load up on risk and try to be the first one out of the gate to launch this product.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, risking going out, but also like getting feedback fast. I think that's one of the biggest resources that we see in successful builders out there. And I think, expanding product features, testing out, but also like attributing metrics is also like one of the things I'm seeing around. Could be like right now wallets or layer 2, right? But I think like it could be kind of like also like pushed around agents, specific kind of like narratives. But again, I think we are extremely like early. And I think also like on the infrastructure side, we're seeing a lot of gaps. I don't know what's your take around kind of like what gaps do you feel like we need to kind of like be filling first? And I think like I just wonder like any kind of like things that you feel like, okay, this is something that we still need in order to like bring things to a next level.
Nothing that jumps out at me that I haven't already mentioned. I'm still waiting to see. Again, I think if you look at the AI agent space, a lot of the reality is that a lot of this we're waiting on the AI labs, right? The AI labs have been the ones that really pushed us to where we are today, and for us to get to that next level, we need them to make certain breakthroughs in terms of their performance and the quality of the models that are backing a lot of what we're doing. So until you get a crypto company that can actually do an RL training run at enough scale to build something that is crypto specific, we're going to be betting on generalizability, right?
Yes.
And the generalization of these very, very large models. If those get good enough, fast enough, then all of this stuff could work out of the gate without us having to expend that much in terms of our own R&D or capex. If you look, for example, at Anthropic, when you look at the new Claude model cards, one of the things that the Anthropic team tests in every new model release of Claude is its ability to use a Bitcoin wallet. And what you see is that over time, Claude is getting better and better at using a Bitcoin wallet, but it's not 90%. It's still relatively low efficacy. But if you start to see all these metrics going up at the same time, that probably means that like, oh shit, we just had an agentic breakthrough, and all this stuff is going to get better very quickly. When that happens, that is going to be the big sort of wind in the sails of many, many startups trying to bring AI agents into many aspects of what we do on chain.
Yes. No, I agree. I know we are almost at time here. I just want to move a little bit higher on the combo and not just speak about agents, as you kind of like steer the conversation and pioneer the conversation in different kind of ways. I know you're kind of like always like pushing kind of, let's focus on utility, more on kind of RWA, like more on kind of like real touch kind of like industries or verticals. What are kind of the main use case that you see, okay, this is something that I'm seeing being built. I really appreciate the fact that those builders are building this. Any specific like use case, you don't need to mention name, of course, but anything that you want to kind of touch on.
I mean, the most obvious thing, in many ways, what's working in crypto is at this point pretty obvious. There's no real secret gems that are hiding somewhere that you haven't heard about. I'm seeing now an enormous mad dash on the stablecoin build-out space, which is just seeing massive growth in stablecoin payments, massive growth in asset tokenization, and the same thing now happening with respect to other currencies trying to get up and running in the stablecoin world. We've got a stablecoin bill now going through Congress that we're seeing the reconciliation between the House bill and the Senate bill. Once those two get reconciled and we see something actually get passed in terms of legislation, that's going to be a huge boon to what I suspect is going to be a stablecoin boon. I think it was Standard Chartered that said they expect stablecoin supply to hit 2 trillion in the span of something like 5 years. So right now it's sitting at like 200 billion. That's basically 10x in the total stablecoin supply. A massive, massive, massive increase in the amount of capital that you're going to start to see moving on chain. I think this is one of the big stories. It's really obvious. It's coming toward us like a train. Everyone knows it. It's just a question of what is the order of operations and how fast does it actually come? So that's a space that I'm watching very closely and spending a lot of my time on.
Yes. Do you see like quantum computing, all these debates about kind of like encryption and these kind of things kind of like scare you, or is it something like, oh, we're too early to actually speak about?
Yeah, I think we're clearly way too early. I think people are getting ahead of themselves. It's a cool story, but no, the reality is that quantum computing, if you look, I think the best measure of this is just go look at prediction markets. So if you go on Metaculus, I mean, the real money prediction markets are not pricing this yet because it's so long of a bet. Nobody would lock up capital for that long. But if you look on Metaculus, right now, the median estimate for when we'll first factor the RSA numbers, which I believe are 768-bit, so they're not even the size of ECDSA keys. The RSA numbers, the median expectation of when they get factored, which means basically a quantum computer that's strong enough to factor them, is I believe it's 2039,
Oof.
which means we've got a long time, right? We've got a long fucking time. So
That's great.
people are getting very excited about this Google announcement. I mean, they published the paper on it in, I think it was like September. And then they marketed it in this big marketing push more recently, which has got a bunch of people freaking out and thinking that quantum is coming. So here's the thing about quantum, and this is very important for everybody to understand. We already thought quantum was going to follow a Moore's law-like trajectory, right? And that was the basis on which we predicted that it was going to be 10 to 15 years until we actually had to worry about quantum. If you assume that's correct, then that means you will still keep seeing, for the next 15 years, very bullish announcements about quantum, right? So when you see a bullish announcement about quantum, the question is not, oh my God, is quantum here? Oh shit, do we have to like move all the cryptography over? The question is it arriving faster than we expected or slower than we expected? And every announcement is always going to sound bullish, because of course it will, right? Because people spend a bunch of money to do this quantum thing. They're going to make it sound bullish and scary. So the question you should be asking yourself, and you should expect, even in the world I'm describing, where it takes 15 years, that there's going to be a parade of announcements as quantum gets better and better and factors larger numbers and becomes more powerful and keeps crossing these physical thresholds. But the only question that actually matters is this ahead of speed or slower than speed? And the way to answer that question is go look at the prediction markets. If the prediction markets move down, that means that, oh, we're moving ahead of pace. If the prediction markets stay solid, that says, oh, this announcement arrived just on time. And if it goes ahead and say, actually, this really bullish announcement that scared everybody, actually, this is slower than we expected for quantum improvements to happen. That is the only question worth answering, and no announcement is going to tell you that, right? Every announcement in every universe is going to sound bullish. So go check the numbers, go check the prediction markets, don't check the headlines.
Yeah, fact data. Yeah, exactly. Agree. Last question. This is more kind of like high level, but if you could teach your 20 years old about one principle, what would be?
That's a good question. Well, when I was 20 years old, I was a professional poker player. So I don't know that I would have understood almost anything about the crypto space. I guess, okay, if I was 20 years old, what I would say is that pay attention to everything that your smartest friends are doing and invest into it early.
Oh, yeah.
I think if I had that heuristic when I was 20 years old, I would have made a lot more money than I did.
Also surround yourself with kind of like same-minded people, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's super important. Okay, so from today, what should every builders remember at this moment in tech? That you're saying, okay, this is something that you should remember. Just enjoy kind of like the moment. This is kind of like a marathon. It's not a sprint. We are too early, but this is something that you should take in.
It's a good question. I mean, look, this technology, whether it's AI or whether it's crypto, is going to continue evolving over the course of your life, right? Do not assume that things are going to be stuck here for all that long. And I think it's very, very easy to get into this mindset that like, oh, I'm chasing this like fixed target. That is crypto, what it looks like today, or AI, what it looks like today. And what you've seen over the last 5 years, even 3 years, is that totally wrong. All this technology is going to change in real time. So keep paying attention. Don't stop using the tech. Don't stop playing around with it. Don't stop updating your intuitions about what it can and can't do. And as long as you're doing that, you're gonna learn alongside the rest of this technology.
Agreed. Yeah, keep building. I think like building and testing things, breaking things, pivoting fast, understanding also like what the users want. I think it's one of the most underappreciated things around builders. And I think like right now everybody's a builder. Even users. I always tell like people like testing out stuff. Okay, do this, try it out, and tell us what you think. I think that's extremely important. Haseeb, thank you so much. I assume we will see you kind of like in stuff like ECC and next, and it's a big pleasure. And we're keeping like looking forward to those conversations and maybe a part 2 for everyone listening here. So thanks everybody for this agent intelligence kind of like episode. I think that was more kind of like high level. I think we learned a lot, and it's just great to have those insights from Haseeb around this. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks so much for listening this, I think 39 minutes, almost 1 hour here. And thanks everyone for listening. Have a good weekend. Thanks so much.